Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it, not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences, such as...
It's definitely been a very helpful tool to be self-aware and have a good understanding, a good sense of self.
This is Tourette's podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network. Hey everyone, it's Ben. Hope you enjoyed the Tourette Association's virtual conference we just had last weekend. It was a blast. Thousands and thousands of people registered, and the sessions were fantastic, edifying, funny, sincere, emotional. Something for everyone, seriously. I recorded a couple other sessions of the conference. So last week, Tourette's podcast released the audio from the conference kickoff. That's me talking with Brittany Wolf and A.D. Smith, two of my favorite Tourette advocates. So I recorded and released that one. I recorded a couple other sessions that I spoke at, and I'll see about releasing them as podcast episodes. One of them was a panel discussion with people involved in the new documentary about Oliver Sacks, who I was lucky to interact with when I was a little kid. The documentary is called Oliver Sacks, His Own Life, and it's so good. It's so real. There's nothing phoned in at all. Let me read the synopsis from PBS real quick. It says, Oliver Sacks, His Own Life, explores the life and work of the legendary neurologist and storyteller, and he shares intimate details of his battles with drug addiction, homophobia, and a medical establishment that accepted his work only decades after the fact. End quote. So that's the synopsis, and yeah, it's heavy, it's dark in a lot of ways, but only as it heads toward being a bright, uplifting story. It's often really funny, of life experience and really being able to connect with others. The big theme on this podcast, empathy, it's all over this documentary, and not in a cheesy way at all. It's fantastic. Please track it down if you haven't already. To quote director Rick Burns, it turns out that the revelatory power, narrative drama, and emotional force of Oliver Sacks' own life story, his case history, rivals that of the extraordinary cohort of people he sought to humanize and understand so brilliantly, deeply, and empathetically in his exceptional clinical practice and writings. End quote. Oliver Sacks obviously has a lot of books out, and I've read a few of them. An Anthropologist on Mars is fantastic. There's a story about a surgeon with Tourette syndrome. I think it's in that book. Anyway, all of his books are good. And Tourette syndrome is certainly something covered in the documentary, Oliver Sacks, His Own Life. If you participated in the conference, I believe you had access to watch it. If not, find a way. I'll see if I can release the interview I did with the filmmakers, including Rick Burns, and people close to Dr. Sacks. And I'll see if I can release the panel discussion I did with Dr. Christine Canalia and others on Tourette advocacy on social media. You know, how are we advocating for ourselves in the age of, TikTok and things like that? That was great. Thanks to the Tourette Association for pulling together such a dynamic conference that people all over the world took part in. If things work out as hoped, the 2022 Tourette Association Conference will be in person in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So looking forward to it. Such a great city, too. I was up there for a Tourette event a few years ago and I loved it. It's a really pretty city. Okay, we're underway with Tourette Awareness Month right now. That's May 15th through June 15th every year. Go to tourette.org and you can find all kinds of ways to do something with it. They've made available these social media tools. They've made it easy to contact your member of Congress about policy issues we all face, the Tourette community faces. All kinds of shareable stories and badges, and you can customize your profile photo and so on. And of course, one of the best ways to support is to donate so we can stay strong on science and research and webinars with the latest info and advocacy and education and on and on. Tourette.org for all kinds of ways to celebrate and support Tourette Awareness Month. There's a lot coming up this season, some important new conversations in the science world related to things a lot of you were talking about. We'll be bringing you that, but right now, the conversation this week that you're about to hear, we're reaching back with someone who is of central importance to the launch of the podcast. That was in early 2018, March 2018, I think. This is a nice, slow, casual discussion about a lot of things, actually, from Tourette syndrome to human-robot hybrids. Seriously. It's a discussion of a new kind of syndrome that we'll be naming after our guest here today. You'll hear about it. She's actually a huge force in the existence of this podcast, which might not have happened at all without people like her. Her name is Maddie, and yes, if you've been listening from the beginning, back in season 1, it's the same Maddie from season 1, episode 1. She was the first guest on Tourette's podcast. Here's a clip.
And I was bringing up some of my old tics, and I mentioned one of them, and I'm doing it now. It's one that I, haven't thought about in a few months. It just hasn't manifested at all, but I feel like it's going to keep me up now. And it's a bizarre tic where I'll move the muscles around the inside of my ear to kind of make it pop like I'm trying to clear it. And it's really, really odd.
You do, you clear your ears? Because that's one that I've always done.
Crazy.
It's so funny. I've never heard of that. And you can't explain it. It doesn't look, or at least for me, it's like you can't see it. And I got so good at doing it where that nobody could see it. But it was one of those ones.
It's invisible. Yeah. And I mean, it keeps me up at night when I do it.
Oh yeah, same.
And I've kind of wondered if I'm...
And we kept in touch a bit over the years, and I just wanted to catch up with her and see how things have changed. Where's her perspective these days on living with Tourette syndrome? She had mentioned that her appearance on the podcast back in the day was helpful in terms of talking with somebody else who knew where she was coming from, similar kinds of brains, and how she was able to share that with other people in her life, having this episode. I experienced the exact same kinds of benefits. The first episode talking with her was a big turning point in my life, and I know we have a lot of new listeners now, so this episode really kind of catches us up on where we've been, and I guess how Tourette's podcast has evolved from my end of things, and how someone who's been on Tourette's podcast or a listener is doing now. I wanted to hear how that was going. We have a lot of fun talking here, and again, we cover a lot of fresh ground. And if my voice sounds different on the conversation you're about to hear, I was in the middle of a really tough allergy situation that made me kind of raspy, so there's that. But here's me talking with the original. Her name is Maddie.
It's made a huge impact, and it's gotten huge, and just how it's impacted your life and everything, because I only really know my own experience of how it's impacted mine, which is pretty significant. I mean, not I don't think to the same extent I'm sure that it's impacted your life. Like this is a whole thing now.
yeah it's and we can just kind of pick it up from here. It's really been life-changing, which sounds, like a hokey kind of thing to say, but I mean, like, really, it's completely changed my perception and the way I process things and my level of patience with other people, and definitely how I think kind of like evaluate myself. And when it comes to depression, anxiety, I feel like I have a much better, I guess, familiarity with how that stuff works. In general, scientifically and in other people. So I feel like I have more of a frame of reference when I feel kind of weird about myself. And so all these things have huge ripple effects, and that's still what I'm kind of coming to grips with. But it's literally just from having these like conversations. I went back and I listened to the first episode with you, and it's nuts how much was like already kind of there and established, like with certain tics that you were familiar with that I thought I was the only person to have. And it was very easy to talk to you, I think, because of that common frame of reference, I guess.
I mean, I can say the same about like, I obviously am not the one that's having all the conversations with people, but, it's really interesting that the sense of just kind of normalcy that you can feel from just having conversations with other people, even if you're not necessarily experiencing the exact same thing, or if there are similarities with things that you're experiencing with other people. Each person is different, but it's almost like, and obviously specialists are the ones that like you should always listen to like your doctor and your specialist and all that, but it's interesting that you can almost like it's not necessarily I don't know how to describe it other than it's just like feeling that sense of just being okay with yourself.
Yeah.
And almost like, I don't know how to describe it. There's just something different about talking with people that share similar experiences, or just hearing from people that share similar experiences to make you feel, like whole and okay, rather than, just hearing from a doctor or something that like, oh yeah, this is normal. This is like, this happens with people that experience this and that. Like, this is a common occurrence. It's different to hear that from somebody like that's kind of like, just, you have to take that face value rather than the fact that, actually hearing other people's experiences.
Yeah. It's really nuts. Like what a lifetime process it can be to, accept yourself. I mean, that's kind of like what style and trends are. It's like, you kind of get swept up in this wave of not wanting to get called out for being different. And if your style clashes with like whatever's trendy at the time, or if you take a completely different kind of, viewpoint on things, or, it's rattling, good or bad. And I think it's just because, the people who it's not comfortable to be in that situation where you're getting called out or viewed as something different.
Or just being the different person.
Yeah. Yeah. Like it's almost like you're a liability on society because you don't think with the pack. And so it's like you can kind of grow up questioning yourself and being, do I measure up? If I, like I really like this girl, is she going to like me when she gets to know me? Or, it's like we have all these fears of how we come off. And so it ends up being this just a very long process. And I think lifetime in a lot of cases to feel okay about yourself and feel like you've landed at a place where you feel safe personally, but you also feel like you can express yourself and feel comfortable with it. And that's something I've always struggled with, even when I was being, quote unquote different or whatever, maybe even in like contrived ways, but just having this kind of conversation and not really having to worry about it because, it's like, you sort of know my background as far as my brain goes, and I know yours, even though, say, hypothetically, we've never talked to each other before. And so just like that, like confidence building that you can get from simply just having somebody to relate to, when it comes to your insecurities. And that's, I think, been like the biggest change for me since, cause it's been like a little more than 3 years, which is crazy since, we did our episode back in the day.
Okay. I was just wondering how long I think it had to have been like definitely over 3 years.
Yeah.
I was just about to ask you, I was like, what was I even doing? I remember I was like, in school, and I mean, yeah, just my life has changed a lot, I think, since our last discussion, just purely based off of where I was in my life.
Yeah.
Like being at like your early 20s being a very, or like college and early 20s, whatever, like being, a time of immense change.
Yeah.
And that's definitely, been the case. So I was just thinking, like,
so you were wrapping up school. Is that what it was when we were talking?
I think so. I think I was wrapping up school. So since then, so I graduated in 2018, with a bachelor's degree in environmental studies, the emphasis in ecology. And that's something that I've really enjoyed all my life. But really kind of got to hone in on that in my final years of college and recognize that, like, I don't need to push myself to be one thing or another. Like, I really enjoy studying the environment and how it all works and how like everything kind of works together. So that's kind of the ecology realm rather than doing something like microbiology, which I just didn't find interesting enough. It was like really, it was just too detail oriented in the tiny things. And I was like, yeah, I like understanding how everything kind of works together.
Right. Yeah.
So after graduating, I had a temporary job for a little bit, and then I was looking for a full-time job, and I've been working full-time for a little over 2 years now, and that's been great. But that's such a huge that really changes you, like how just your life works. I mean, like I went from being in college where I didn't have a full day of anything.
Yeah.
Right? Like you have your classes at different times of the day, and like you kind of build your schedule around what maybe works for you and your classes, of course. But but since then, I was living at home, and moved back to the Bay Area, and then I started working at an environmental consulting firm.
Awesome.
And it's been really great because I've been able to work with people in a culture that's that's more laid back, like the kind of the motto the company, one of the mottos of the company is we take our work seriously, not ourselves. Yeah. And and I really resonate with that, and
yeah, me too.
Yeah, just like great office atmosphere and great like atmosphere with the people that I work with. And I think that's really important because I don't feel it, that takes some of the pressure off of being in a very kind of like, strict structured environment. It's less like that.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I think it's like, really important.
Like by contrast, like, if you're just surrounded in a work environment by a bunch of 1950s, like stern school principals, then that's going to set up, maybe there's the self-awareness and anxiety and all that. And then that leads to the ticking and
right.
Yeah. So that's a great place to be, is where, you don't feel quite as much like in a vice. And if you do end up ticking or something like that, probably no big deal. If anything, it's a conversation. Which is something, we talk about in the podcast a lot, is like, for one, like, transitioning out of something like school then into a professional environment is like, it can be a really nerve-wracking thing. And it was for me, because it's like, I better do a good job. It's not just a bad grade. It's getting fired and, like losing money and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I guess a lot of people talk about how ticking kind of picks up when you go through a transition that might be kind of like nervous or anxious.
Oh, definitely.
With you having like a nice kind of chill office environment with cool people, did that kind of help to flatten things out, or what was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely did. It's one of those things though that like, we're kind of regardless of what that environment was, just having the change and everything. I mean, first of all, moving is I found incredibly stressful for me. Like I, regardless of if I have help or if I, am like, everything's kind of fine. Like I don't have necessarily a time crunch or whatever, but like moving out of college, like my parents came and helped me move out and like drove back with me, unloading the van, like to bring my stuff into my house. I started having a panic attack, or not a panic attack, an anxiety attack. And like, I don't commonly have that. Like I'll have times where I'm like, very anxious and I'm like, okay, I'm really feeling this, but I mean, I was full on, I started like kind of crying and hyperventilating and didn't really know why. And like without being particularly set off by anything. And I was in like the comfort of my family and my own home and everything, but just that kind of, I just was way overwhelmed with all of what I needed to do. And being kind of like tired, exhausted after a long drive and like all of this stuff. And so, that was probably like the most intense kind of episode I've had during that crazy time of change. But then when it came to actually starting work, I was still at home. So that kind of helped smooth things out. Like I was comfortable. I knew that the culture of this company would be nice, but it was definitely, it was my first full-time job. So I was very nervous with how everything would how it would be. Yeah. And, but, so I still had that kind of anxious, it was excited. It was kind of like, there was that positive anxious energy, where I was really anxious to get started and kind of all of that. But it definitely was still something that leading up to kind of like my first day and everything, I had to kind of constantly remind myself that, or just be aware, be cognizant of my, of like how I was feeling and like kind of calming myself down. But yeah, I mean, I ended up actually telling my manager within, I think like the first 2 days that I have Tourette's and other, comorbidities, or just like I had, these, I don't remember how I like explained it, and it was kind of brought up a little bit naturally. Like she obviously didn't ask, but but I felt like it was, even though I wasn't necessarily having like a really kind of bad time, like where my tics were really bad, but I just felt, I don't know, it just kind of like, at that moment, I was like, I want to tell her this. I want her to know she's like a nice person. She's happy to have me here.
Yeah.
We're having kind of like I don't know, this is a casual kind of environment right now. Like, I feel comfortable in telling her this, and I think it's just important to kind of get that on the table.
Well, yeah. What did you think she would benefit by, like, in knowing that, and you as well? Like, what do you think what outcome were you hoping for by volunteering that info?
I think really just transparency. I wasn't necessarily concerned that it would particularly like affect my my work ability or anything, at least, you know, at that time. But I found later on that there were times where she was able to notice. I actually work remotely from her. She's in a different office. And there were times where like I'd be on the phone with her. So we talk a lot on the phone, you know, like especially at the beginning of my, you know, job when she still had to be much more like hands-on mentoring. Mm-hmm. And there were times where she could tell that I was getting really stressed out or anxious about something, and like that I really like, it's going to be okay. Like, I'm not, you know, I have support. She's very good at like telling me that I have support and like making sure that I'm not, you know, I'm not like alone in something, or like that I don't need to start, you know, freaking out or stressing out because there's a lot to do. Like, I can just kind of reach out for that help. And so I think it is beneficial, at least like, I don't know if I necessarily initially, when I first told her, was expecting anything in particular. It was more of just, you know, this is a part of things. Yeah. Like, it's kind of, you know, part of like, it works its way into my personality and my moods and my work ethic and everything. And so I just want to be transparent. And that's actually helped, I think, since then, because she knows that, you know, I might like at times be extra, I don't know, I'm in a very anxious mood or something like that. And it's that extra personable like connection that helps with our relationship.
Yeah, it's cool because, you know, it's sometimes not just for the sake of like, you know, in case there's a situation I want you to know. It's you know, it's more like, I like when you said transparency, because if you do open up about something like that, and you know, you're not just doing it randomly, like you're doing it in context. And so when you bring something up like that up, I mean, you've definitely like shown a vulnerable side to yourself. And I think that helps people to get comfortable around you. And, you know, in better case scenarios, where they're like, oh God, I have a family member who is, you know, was just diagnosed with that. And, you know, I could use some perspective on it. It's good to get that kind of understanding around. And, you know, that's different from, this is not me saying, you know, like everybody, you know, go shout it out and, you know, like your business is your business and is certainly none of mine. You know, it's like you consent to what I know about you. But, you know, if you do that, then I think that does help people to kind of see you as an actual person. And some people don't like that, I guess, but I find that that's just, that's one of the functional pieces that's kind of changed my life is, you know, again, not like randomly bringing it up and, you know, like wearing shirts and things like that. So I hope people come up to ask me, but, you know, when we do have that sincere conversation, that's when, I don't know, just things get better in whatever context that is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of like, you know, I wanted to kind of give you, I know I'd messaged you, you know, a while ago and like told you kind of how, like when you had sent me messages saying, hey, somebody mentioned you on like, you know, take a listen to this episode and stuff like that. And I, you know, I've expressed to you before that I really am appreciative of my experience, of, you know, my experience with this podcast and with talking with you and like having, you know, being on an episode. And the way that it's really changed, it's basically when it came out, I shared it with like a lot of people. Yeah. I shared it with like everyone, which was something that I think, like, for example, all of my family, like my aunts and uncles and cousins and stuff that, you know, I knew, but it wasn't something that I had a conversation with them because it just wasn't it wasn't really like necessary. It wasn't one of these things like, you know, I'm going to just, I don't know. I was diagnosed back when I was like 15 and like dealing with stuff. And I don't know, maybe somebody asked me or like talked to my parents about it then, but I barely remember it. And it's sometimes, you know, it's a kind of conversation that sometimes some people I think are better, equipped to like have a meaningful conversation about it, and others, while they still care and, you know, want to support you or whatever, maybe feel a little bit more awkward, like don't know how to have that conversation.
Right.
So when I shared it, pretty much like all of my family and all of my friends like listened to the episode, and I had a lot of conversations with people after it where they were like, you know, hey, I listened to the podcast and it was really interesting. And like, you had mentioned this and that, or, you know, you like, how did, you know, even just asking me how it came about that I, you know, did this.
Yeah.
Did this episode.
Yeah. You're one of the very first.
Yeah.
I mean, the first episode,
and
but
so it's like, how did this even happen? Like, well, Twitter. And so it was really beneficial in that context to just kind of like have that I think it also gave people permission to obviously, you know, I'm open up enough and that like I'd be happy to talk with my family and friends about it, but I feel like it almost gave them a sense of like permission to ask me about stuff, and which I was happy to do and happy to talk about, and it just kind of like adds that extra, you know, I'm close with my family, close with my, you know, cousins and stuff like that. But it's an additional side that, you know, maybe when you're just getting together for family things and you're having kind of fun, and it's more of a, like, you're not talking about your deepest struggles, you know, so that was really beneficial. But then also, I started dating somebody, at like pretty much right out of college. Like I moved back home. I was like, okay, all of my friends that I went to high school with are pretty much, that I'm still close with, are pretty much out of the city, maybe probably even out of the state. And I was like, okay, I ended up meeting people, trying to kind of like see what it was like in the Bay Area as a, you know, adult that can go and do things by themselves. And ended up started dating somebody named Matt, and he, I told him about this episode. I think it was like on our third date that I told him that I had Tourette's. And it ended up being one of these things, like we were watching like a soccer game or like a movie or something. And I was doing like my shoulder tick, and he's like, "Oh, are you uncomfortable? Like, do you need like?" And I was like, "No, actually, it's Tourette's." Like, and I gave kind of the quick little spiel about just what it is and like how it affects me and what it means to me without, you know, getting too much into it. And he was just like, you know, took it totally like, "Oh, okay," like, you know. And at this point, even though it was only the third date, we had already spent a lot of time together. Like it was like our first date. Like we really just clicked, and we spent hours talking to each other about like even into like our family and stuff. And I'm still dating him, and we actually live together now. And like,
oh, that's awesome.
So, but basically, I told him about the episode, and I remember like kind of, I don't know, maybe it was like a month into us as dating, and I told him about the episode, and we were driving to go camping, and we were in the car. And he was like, "Hey, so, like, if you're, you know, like, do you mind if I ask you, I kind of want to learn a little bit more about, like, I just want to talk to you about, like, Tourette's and just learn more about it and kind of get to know more about it." And I was like, "Oh yeah, well, you know, I was also this, like, you know, there's this episode, that I told you about." He's like, "Oh yeah, I listened to the whole first season." And that was at the time, it was like, wow. That was the first season came out. And I was just like, oh awesome. My goodness. Like I hadn't even finished listening to the whole first season at that time. And
oh, that's amazing.
That made it, that was like a moment where I started like tearing up.
Wow.
This is amazing. I've told this person, I mean, and you know, it was obviously a thing where I'm like, okay, wow, like this guy's really special.
Yeah.
But also just that he had like, I mean, he got all the background and the context and that the podcast really helped him just get a better understanding of the whole world of Tourette's.
Yeah.
And I think just the impact that the podcast has had for people that don't have Tourette's, don't experience it, but for those that are like know people that do, it's created a whole just resource for understanding and connecting and understanding how to support, how to talk about it, how to just be there for people that are dealing with you know what we're dealing with.
Yeah, because I mean, it's a good point that you know you can define Tourette syndrome, and you know you can send somebody a link to to whatever the definition is online, and but you know until you throw it into a human being, and you know all of a sudden like nuance takes off and emotion and all kinds of other things, like you don't really get the picture, you know, unless you really spend time, you know, listening to or observing people. And observing sounds like some creepy clinical thing, but just you know, just like, you know what I mean? Just like absorbing the context, and then that gives you the appreciation. And, you know, it's like in so many different scenarios too. This is a really crude comparison. I'm probably going to regret it saying it because it almost doesn't make sense, but like, it's like, you know,
you can always cut it out.
It's like, you hear like parents say like, you know, we weren't planning on having a kid, but you know, like I would never go back. And, you know, it's like, you know, this person's the center of my world now. And it's like, once you kind of get to know a situation and appreciate the human in it, then everything around it kind of becomes easier. And the definitions become just kind of like things on the side stage. And that's less of what you have to not worry about, but that's what you have to appreciate is the actual person who's in front of you and their nuances and how they're different and all of that. Yeah, I just love it that he listened to that much of it, because that shows the knowledge that that's how he's going to get that kind of information, that kind of appreciation. That's amazing.
It really was. I mean, and he's a very, he's like a researcher and like very analytical person. So naturally when there's something that he like learns about for the first time, he always is like researching. Like he goes down, you know, Wikipedia holes of like, oh, I'm going to learn about this thing. And then goes down and learns another thing, all of that. So it's kind of like, it was his first instinct. He told me that like, after that date, when I first told him that I had Tourette's, he looked it up and like read I think, you know, Tourette Association of America, like the whole, you know, what that all means. And did his due diligence basically before coming back to me with, I guess, you know, not wanting to ask like, you know, intrusive or I guess, quote unquote, dumb questions, you know, what you would say like, oh, well, I wanted to learn about it, which of course there are no dumb questions because every person is, you know, different with this kind of thing.
He's probably like the world's like leading Tourette researcher right now.
Probably. But like secretly, he's like putting out books under a different name. Like, but, yeah, so, you know, that's a whole, you know, side of it. But then of course, yeah, the whole, like the side of just, attacking a person to it. And it was really neat when I was able to, like, when you would message me, I think it was in the beginning of season 2, that there was somebody you had on, I can't think of her name, but a young woman that had actually mentioned me by name. And when you and I think, so I think it was beginning of season 2. And so I remember, you know, you telling me about that, and I listened to it, and I told Matt about it, and he was just like, you know, that's amazing. Like you are making a difference. Like your experience has, you know, benefited other people, or you sharing your experiences has benefited other people. Yeah. And like, that's it, just the very, very supportive of, not just like, oh, this is just a thing that like is just kind of a part of your, being and it's whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like this additional kind of support, I think because of his understanding of how I deal with it and what I'm dealing with on a daily basis or on a maybe monthly basis of like all of the other kind of, struggles with attention and anxiety and, all of this different stuff, because he has a better understanding. There's like an additional kind of appreciation and support that it's like, you are amazing for going through all of like the fact you deal with so much stuff and like there's all this going on and you're still persevering and like all of this. And it's really, like this, that kind of understanding, I think garners more support or just, I don't know. And I feel like the same for my parents, once they kind of started understanding more what I was dealing with back when I was like diagnosed and stuff.
Yeah.
They're, the understanding kind of garners support and additional like, cheerleaders when you're doing really bad.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You're like feeling like crap and, like you're killing it. You're everything. Like, what can I do to help?
Yeah. I was going to say that the act of talking about it with somebody else makes you better at talking about it with other people in terms of, but I will say, I mean, so you were, if not the first, so you were the first episode, but you might have been possibly the first person I talked to, maybe the first or second.
I think you had said that you talked to at least one other person.
Yeah, it was
at that point.
I think within, like the first couple days of me recording, I talked to maybe 3 or 4 people, but with you, so I didn't even really know, the kinds of questions I was going to ask. The information that you just kind of brought forward created questions for me to ask to other people. So you do get better by talking about it with other people, but you already had like a really good sense of, I don't know, like you had a really good compass with it and how to explain
sense of self.
Tourette. Yeah. I mean, it's just, you had very, I think, succinct ways of saying things that I very quickly related to that I'd never heard before. And so you do get better by talking with other people, but you already kind of had it off the bat, which I think was really cool for setting the tone of the podcast to follow and, kind of how I ask questions and what curiosities I had based on, certain things that came up during that interview and maybe to try to like bring up, like weird tics I have to see if anybody else has it. Like, the ear popping tic is something you had. We're like, whoa, I thought I was the only person to have that. And so it's neat to have those discoveries, but I mean, you were already pretty well channeled into knowing how to express it.
Well, thank you. I mean, I really appreciate you, saying that. And if you can't hear it in my voice, I have like a big grin on my face right now. And I think that that's something, that I've kind of known. It's definitely been a very helpful tool to be self-aware and have a good understanding, a good sense of self. And that's something that I kind of had to, I think, figure out early on. I mean, I think part of what helps is that, I'm a very outgoing person and I'm, like 1,000% extroverted and, and like, so, talking to people and kind of opening up about certain things, might come easier to me than it might others, but also just, I don't know, being able to describe things to like, I wanted to be my parents to understand like what I was feeling, what I was dealing with. And then I wanted to, once I was, trying to get diagnosed for like ADHD and Tourette's and everything, it was, trying to explain what I'm feeling and all of this stuff that like, you end up kind of figuring out the best ways to describe things. And then just really having to pay attention to yourself and your brain and what you're going through, especially when like, when I was trying out different medications and everything and like needing to pay attention to how I felt, one day versus the other and all that, and just be really in tune with yourself. And I think that like that kind of period of time, when I was first kind of dealing with with everything when I was first of all, when I was, my Tourette's was like, I think kind of at its peak, at its worst, in my early teenage years. And then going through the period of like, trial and error with medications and with like cognitive behavioral stuff. And it made I took a huge leap in my self-awareness. Mm-hmm. And that in a relatively short period of time because of all of that, which is a benefit in other parts of my life, right? Like it's not just that I need to be, I think it's really beneficial for people to have a good sense of self, because you need to understand yourself before you can really have the most like true, pure like relationships with other people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And just like how people say you need to love yourself before you can like fully love anybody else, like that kind of thing. I'm a huge proponent of that.
Totally. Yeah. No, it's so big and something that I think maybe I knew at, some part of my mind, but not completely consciously the value of that. And knowing how you can be of help to other people in a way that maybe they can't, like we all have our individual traits. And sometimes parents will write to me and say, we think our son or we think our daughter has TS, but we're also thinking of just kind of like not telling him and letting him, define his own self. And mm-hmm. I get the concept of that about, if you tell someone they have something that could be seen as a flaw, then all of a sudden you have this like psychic weight you have to deal with. And, oh God, is this going to define me or how do I get away from it? And so I can see not wanting to put that burden on somebody, but everybody else I talk to is like, once I finally got the diagnosis, I was like, oh my God, I finally,
it's a relief.
Yeah. It's like, I know something that can lead you to other places to explore yourself better. When I said like my life has changed in the past 3 years, I mean, it really, really has. And it's because of these realizations about some of the basic advice of like, be yourself sounds like the most generic advice you could give to somebody, but it's like, it's worth repeating again. Mm-hmm. And once you finally get there, then it's like, you get it. And maybe some people never get there.
Well, I mean, I think it's a process too. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're never like, we're ever changing. Mm-hmm. We're ever, we're learning every day and well, hopefully, like it's definitely during the pandemic being inside, I've learned things about myself.
Yeah. If I'm still the person I was when I was 15, never mind.
Yeah, exactly. I think most people, well, pretty much everyone changes, and most people, it's like for the better as you live and you learn and you meet new people and experience new things. Like, you learn something new every day. Like it's, and I would say that the same is true for, yourself, at least in a lot of cases, just because as you experience things and as you mature and your relationships change with other people and you maybe like new jobs and all of that, it helps your sense of self or how you understand yourself will like change. Mm-hmm. Or how you are will change. And so you're then like kind of rediscovering different parts about yourself. I mean, you're an ever changing, being. Mm-hmm. And so, even though I would say that I kind of understand myself pretty well for like my age or like where I am at with my life, like that's not to say that I am, I know everything about myself or I can predict.
Yeah.
I can be I haven't reached whatever, like. Yeah,
you've matured. You can stop.
Where I'm just like a perfect being. Like, hell no, I'm not a perfect being.
The Tourette Association of America is the premier nonprofit working to raise awareness, advance research, and provide ongoing support to those with Tourette syndrome or tic disorder. With a network of over 130 chapters, support groups, and centers of excellence, the TAA engages with communities across the nation in an effort to provide tools, webinars, workshops, and support for all seeking assistance. As a primary sponsor of Tourette's podcast, the TAA supports the authentic conversations showcasing the diverse representation of the TS community. To learn more, visit Tourette.org, Tourette.org.
But I mean, that's kind of the point is like, is knowing that and just kind of, and this sounds so generic in the way I'm saying it right now, but But in knowing that you're not perfect and being completely cool with that, because, and even being okay, like, looking at things that are imperfect and being like, I'm not even going to work on you. Like, you're good to go. You're fine. You know, I can get by with this imperfection. And, but exposing yourself to your vulnerabilities and, you know, kind of coming to terms with them in a different way, I feel like is kind of at least where you want to be in terms of like mentality as you change throughout your life. And because that can help you with all kinds of other things that are, you know, I think all the time about, so I'm about to turn 41, and I think about, you know, like what could happen in the next 10 years. You know, it's like, I'm not going to be perfectly happy for the next 10 years. What's the bad thing that's going to happen? And just the sort of like undefined bad thing that's going to happen in my future gives me all kinds of crazy anxiety, but I'm still able to kind of like negotiate with that anxiety because I've identified it within myself and how it works within me and in my brain and what it's going to make me do. And so I can stop that runaway train of anxiety thinking about this undefined thing that's supposed to happen at some point in my life. And so, you know, as I change, hopefully I'll still have the same like self-negotiation power because I, you know, have been able to have these conversations with people like you and get to a place where flaws are pretty good mile markers for yourself.
Part of life.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's what makes us human, right? Like, you know, we're not robots yet. Maybe in the future.
Yeah.
maybe, yeah. Who knows? Who knows how long it'll be until we're like all part robot.
So, who was it? It might have even been Elon Musk. Like someone who was saying like,
I was just thinking like Elon Musk or something. I can imagine him being like, yeah, let's, you know,
yeah,
replace our brains or something.
He brought up the point that if you think about like all the intelligence or sentience as humans see it, think about all of that exists out there. The share of, if you look at it like a pie chart, the share of human sourced intelligence is shrinking as you add more of this like electronic stuff and AI and everything like that. And you might think of intelligence as like two different things. There's like, you know, the experiential intelligence and then there's just sort of programmed. But if you cut into that pie chart more all the time with like artificial intelligence and things that are designed to learn and draw conclusions that are sort of like kind of roughly how a rational person would draw conclusions. And that's another thing I think about too, is just sometimes when you have human flaws, and this might be kind of like a Star Trek conversation or something, but like when you have these like this humanity to you that, you know, and flaws, and you recognize them, it kind of leaves you in a better position to negotiate with, you know, the other bad things that come in life. And maybe that's a different way of saying what I already said, but
yeah, very, very philosophical.
But, you know, yeah, it is about injecting optimism into this sort of natural sense of like it, because, you know, if you're realistic, that's going to include some pessimism. And, you know, I don't know, just to get to know people in this community who can speak the same language, it's almost like you can you can see it coming and kind of share the experience with other people who get it too. You know, it's not just me being like, oh my God, why is this happening to me of all people on the earth? It's like, no, it's happening to a lot of people. And, you know, that they're feeling it the exact same way, odds are, right now. So it's like, it doesn't always, trying to rationalize through like panic attacks and anxiety points doesn't always work. Because with me, like my pessimism can always undo my optimism, you know, by throwing certain scenarios at it or rationalities or like whatever rationalizations. Right. I mean, this kind of circles around to what we were talking about at first, was just simply just talking to somebody without, you know, if there's an agenda here, it's just to kind of catch up, and we're talking about it in the context of Tourette syndrome, but otherwise we've just been talking, you know?
Right.
And
right. That's important. Or, I mean, that's, yeah, I think that's, it's really beneficial because, you know, even though this is like Tourette's podcast, there's so much more to Tourette's than just like tics and understanding. I mean, I've learned not only from myself, but, you know, listening to conversations on the podcast or just other experiences that, you know, there's so many other things that are, you know, common points, between, you know, people that people that with brains that are wired, you know, like in a similar way. and all of the other kind of fun ailments,
yeah, mm-hmm.
or whatever. I don't know how to, but like dealing with all the different quirky ways that our brains work and function, and decide to be sometimes nice and creative, and then sometimes decide to be super I don't know, like sometimes inhibit like the ability to do things, and you're just like, hey brain, can you not do that right now? And you're like, can you let me be productive? That'd be great, thanks. Yeah. And I think that's something that I can connect with other people on, that even people that don't have like Tourette's, but like considering there's so much that is tied in with it, and it's so complex, and we as humans like to put things in boxes. We like to have is this like black or white? Is this like Tourette's or ADHD or whatever? Whereas like there's really so much more of a spectrum, and there's so much more just like intertwined. And so, I mean, I've had conversations with other people that I'm, like in my life, like, run close with, that, maybe they're starting to deal with something, or they realize like, oh, I'm actually, I realize that I have, anxiety, or like I've been dealing with kind of like depression, anxiety, something like that. And just being able to have that conversation, that even if I'm, maybe not dealing with the exact same thing that they are, just that there are ways that our brains are wired that, there are common threads, and to be able to talk with people and say, like, hey, your thoughts and your feelings are valid. Like, people go through this stuff, you have your own experience. So like, I can't exactly speak to what you're doing. And obviously also prefacing it all with, I'm not a therapist. Like, I'm not a specialist. Like, make sure you're still seeing like somebody if like you need help. But like being somebody that can be like a confidant, and somebody that can, like I've been through my own share of, figuring myself out, and, going through the process, and it's, like it's work, but it's worth it to, feel better in the long run, and to set yourself up for, moving forward, rather than letting these things hold you back or like beat you down, so be just mental stuff in general beyond just Tourette's.
Yeah. And being a good confidant to somebody, as you were saying too, sometimes like you don't even know with people, and people have a self-consciousness of speaking up about, whatever diagnosis they have, until they hear somebody else talk about it comfortably. And, I could be talking about it just randomly, and someone else overhears it, or somebody I work with, and they're like, they'll feel more comfortable, maybe, whether it's reaching out to you or at least looking into it more for themselves, and seeing if there's community out there, so they can finally talk about it, instead of living kind of like, behind glass,
pretending that it's not existing.
Which is everything I was doing before the podcast started.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and that's just, bringing awareness. It's just a huge deal. And, obviously we're so much better at it now, like than, a few generations ago, where it's, just pretend that everything's fine, and pretend that, there isn't anything wrong, or there isn't anything different, or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's so important. And I think so great that we are moving in the direction of being of awareness and acceptance and understanding. And that, I mean, it's not the case for a lot of people still. And there's a lot of people that are, feel that they aren't accepted, or they won't be. And, and like my heart goes out to those people that are struggling that don't have the support, but, or the direct support, by their like direct family members, or even themselves,
right?
And it's, but we're in so much better place, I think, with advocacy, self-advocacy, and having spaces like this to talk about things and express how we feel, and just be validated in our own experiences.
I was thinking about the people who, really do have a sense of dread that they're not going to connect with somebody in their, in their own like personal life who really gets them or is patient with them, or, if you're just feeling that sense of like isolation-based doom. One thing I keep picturing that's helping me out is that if you just picture the world in every single like action that happens on it, someone's choice to cross the street, someone's choice to launch a new product, someone's choice to just all these little, and just all the things that happen in nature, and, just all these moving variables. It's like all of this stuff is moving to where at some point there's going to be some kind of alignment that can benefit you and will make you happy, or you can take advantage of, or, or can like really kind of help to show you the missing piece or something. It just feels like, and I was talking with Sophia the other day about this too. It's like time is like this like conveyor belt where it's like,
yeah,
it's almost like you're standing still and time is sliding past you, but it's going to bring you things. And
right.
like, you can take actions for yourself that can help speed up the process, or you can meet it halfway or something, but time is going to bring you these things. And kind of rambling, but going back to what you were saying about making that connection. And if you haven't accepted it within yourself, or you're struggling with it, yeah, like hope really is out there. I mean, all this stuff is moving around all the time, and something's going to avail itself to you.
There are so many freaking people on this planet. There's a lot of people on this planet, and so there's bound to be somebody that's feeling something similar.
Yeah.
We're all individuals, but there's a lot of overlap. We're all just made of the same things anyway, right?
Yep.
So,
is there anything I didn't ask about that we should hit here that's significant to you in the past, like 3 years, or anything that you've kind of come to learn or change your mind about, or?
Beyond what I was already kind of saying that I've learned from listening to the podcast and learning about, myself and other people, and how, just that there are so many other things that are tied in with like Tourette's and that, I didn't previously think were related. I think just, the biggest changes have been, I wanted to tell you about, I've found a job, and I'm like a functioning adult, and I don't live at home. And I live with my boyfriend that we've solid for almost 3 years now. And that this podcast, I think, helps with initial parts in our relationship with just understanding. And that also helped with, I don't know, just that I was able to share it out to other people that wanted to listen,
right.
that were interested in finding out, and not having to push it on anybody. Like, hey, listen to an hour of me talking or whatever. But, like, hey, this resource is here. And, if you're interested in, I'm happy to talk, but this is a resource. And, pandemic is just, it's been a whole thing. It's hard for introverts and extroverts alike, but like as somebody that I, feed off of people, it's changed my, just how I'm able to, function throughout the day. But, I'm lucky that I don't live. If I was living alone, I would go crazy.
What has that done to your energy? Because, if I have energy to expend situationally and the situations change, maybe I don't have any good examples in my own life, but if I don't have energy if I have energy, but I'm not able to expend it in the way I want, that can change me,
Yeah. It's definitely frustrating at times, but I also, I've also, I guess, kind of adapted, and like, I've taken on different additional hobbies. Like I've always liked to do, art. Like I like to draw and paint, and I took up embroidery.
Oh, that's cool.
I was like joking with my friends because it was at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was like, I've turned into an old woman since the start of this pandemic. I just like to sit and embroider, and
I bet that feels good though.
It's fun.
Like
it's a new hobby. And I, was one of the many people that took up making sourdough, and I still bake sourdough, and I really I've always enjoyed baking, but like, that's just another kind of fun skill. So I think some of my energy has just gone into doing these other things, keeping my brain stimulated. And it's interesting. I mean, as I said, I'm like, as I've said many times, like, I'm a very social person, and normally just would thrive and, I recharge by being with people rather than recharge by being alone. Right. But then with this pandemic and not being social with people in person, the interactions that I've had recently, like with people, I found I'm like, wow, I'm actually like, I'm rusty. My social skills, this is more difficult than it was before, which is so weird because that's my whole livelihood.
I've totally thought about that, about how, when we, in general, as a world, we don't have anything to worry about again, in terms of like the pandemic, and we're all kind of out again and in the office together. And that's the case for some people already, but just how awkward interpersonal interaction is going to be. And, what's okay to do, what isn't, like the weird, like, misfires when it comes to hugging people and
or even like awkward or just like having a conversation and keeping the conversation go. I mean, it's weird because it's like, I'm still on, I have Zoom calls and like still on phone calls all the time, but it's different when you're in person and there's those like moments of silence. I was going to say awkward silence, but it doesn't necessarily have to be an awkward silence. It's just like the normal kind of gaps in conversation. just being, being a functional human around other humans. Like, how do you function again?
Yeah. Well, I guess in that sense, I'll be looking forward to it. So the bar is kind of like, the playing field is leveled a little bit when it comes to feeling awkward in situations, which I do anyway. So
you just say, oh, the pandemic has really done a number on me, and everyone can relate.
Good excuse.
Yeah, totally. And, like, oh, I don't, like, how do you, sorry, my hugging game has been hit. Like, I don't remember how to do this. Right. If you have an awkward, if you go for one of those, like, elbow or, like, you want to do an elbow thing, or you're doing where are we at right now?
God, yeah, that's already well, I guess it has been a disaster since the pandemic began. People have the fist bump mentality, the elbow mentality, the shoulder bump mentality, which is kind of weird because you get close that way.
I haven't done that.
Yeah, I've seen that. I'm like, that makes less sense than a handshake, I think. This is a big reset button in a lot of ways. I think maybe kind of situationally good for me, but I've always been an introvert, but I am looking forward to getting back to my office more regularly and just, conducting business with people in person versus the Zoom screen where it's just kind of like a tight box around their head, which is not what people look like in real life. And it's so weird.
2D.
Yeah.
Everyone's just like 2D. Yeah. Like you don't even know how, like, like if you're meeting new people, you don't even know if they're how like tall they are compared to you, or like
or what their face looks like in good lighting, and
like what the back of their head looks like. I mean, that's important, but it's just weird things that you just like real life that you just don't you don't know.
Yeah, it's like when you see somebody at the grocery store who you work with and you don't recognize them at first because they're just wearing like a t-shirt and jeans. And it just looks so out of place that like your brain isn't quickly filling in the blank of like, oh, that's Jay from work or whatever.
Yeah. You're like, oh yeah, there are people. I remember that's like when you're little and you see like your teacher outside of like, what? My teacher has a life of like, her own.
I remember seeing my third grade teacher in the grocery store with her husband, and that blew my mind. I was like, she's got a husband.
There's a whole other person. Like, how does she have time for that? Like, I'm more important.
Right, yeah. I thought she lived at the school.
Yeah, exactly. All teachers just live at schools. That's been a whole thing that I'm really glad I'm not dealing with during the pandemic, being in school.
Yeah, that's rough.
I couldn't imagine trying to be a student. I mean, but that's a whole other conversation and a whole other thing that I am not. I don't know anything about. I'm at the age where some of my friends are teachers and they're starting out their teaching career.
Yeah.
And like, I was always checking in with them at the beginning, like, how are you? How is this what's going on? And it's still just something that we're going to have to, I wonder how it's going to affect the generation of kids that are, in school and stuff. And also just for like, jobs and that it's just going to, as you said, it's a huge reset button. There's going to be a whole kind of wave of people affected by this, that it's, I was a pandemic, I was a pandemic student or something, like how they say, like I was a, I was a recession, like I, went out of college during the recession, like there's a whole group of people that, that happened versus like, so it'll be interesting to see how that has affected people. And, I just hope that mental health won't take too much of a hit, or, I mean, because, there still has been abilities to meet with people online, which is great. But with, getting the support that people need. And
what you were saying, even about like calling people like, pandemic babies and people who were born like during 2020 and all that. I mean, there is also kind of this, I kind of wonder, the people who were, at some point of like consciousness in their life, and that's a weird way to say it, of being, kind of like aware of your identity and you're an adult or you're older than 13 or whatever it is, and where you have your rhythm and then all of a sudden you're shaken out of it and you have to be home all the time. Or at least told, to keep your distance from people and adjust to all these, like new ways of living and doing business and all that. It always seems like if there's something like that kind of like rattles the population and rattles like the mindset of it and how it all works together, 20 years later or 15 years later, there's like a name for it, like the weird trauma, and psychological stuff that was going on. There's like, this is like the worst comparison example ever, but when people say things like Gulf War syndrome or something, like it's tied to like a thing or like an event. And I kind of wonder what the future thing is, that we're going to be calling this, like the weird awkwardness that we have with each other, or the social anxieties that we have with each other when we come out of this. And, or is nothing going to happen? Are we just going to like slip right back into it? For me, I don't know how that's possible because I feel so removed and awkward anyway.
I mean, maybe like PTCD, post-traumatic corona, or COVID. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if it was, it was colloquially called something like that, where it's just like
the scientists are listening.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, I better get credit.
Yeah, you'll get credit. It's going to be called Maddie syndrome.
We're just Oh, great. I would love to be. Yeah, let's throw my name on that. It's like a terrible part of our lives. That Maddie syndrome. No, and not to lessen PTSD or anything, but there's a whole. I mean, there's people that have really been knocked out by this. That it's just. Yeah, it's a crazy thing to be. I mean, we've been living through history during all of this. Those of us born before the 20th century, it started with the turn of the 20th century, 21st century, turn of the, you know what I'm saying? Like,
I'm with you.
1900s to 2000s. That was, I think, the start of this, like, time change where everything just started changing so rapidly that everything, like, it's crazy to think that, I'm only, how old am I? I think 24. Yes, I'm 24. And I've already seen so much change.
It's like, if you think about it, there are like 3 big things that have happened since 2000 that have caused just immeasurable amounts of change. I think one is September 11th. And not to make a funny statement for the next thing, but I mean, it's true, is the introduction of the iPhone. And
well, just internet, like just portable internet, basically.
I mean, that has directly impacted how we're able to work from home during the pandemic and the technologies that are based on connectivity. So it's like the three things. It's like iPhone, 9/11, the pandemic are like these three things that have been that have happened.
Yeah, well, and then all the other things like the 2008 housing bubble. We've got like AI. We've got, I mean, which is still connected to the whole portable internet thing. But like cell phones, like all of a sudden being, not just iPhones, but cell phones, like having like, I mean, my mom tells me about when, like, I think she finally got a cell phone because my dad made her, because she was like pregnant with me, and he's like, you can't be out and about and like have issues. Like you need to have a cell phone so you can call me or something if like you need something. And, or maybe it was my brother, because I don't know if 96. I don't know. Whatever. Basically, it's just like these things that have like now every single I mean, you see little kids with like smartphones, which is just wild to me. But all of this, all of these changes, and then this pandemic being like the next big, and all of the economic turmoil that it's caused.
Wow,
that's interesting.
We're winding back to what we were talking about earlier with the singularity or whatever. This half human, half perfect robot android who will be immune from disease and perfect and no Tourette syndrome and boring life because nothing stands out and makes them individual.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I've heard, people like you've asked the question many times, like if you could choose to have, like, would you change if you could have like Tourette syndrome or not? And when we had our last conversation, I said, no, I would choose to not have it.
Yeah.
And I would actually say that it's still the same. Even though I'm able to, deal with things, and like, I haven't had it as, like my kind of peak worst periods of like, were kind of a while ago. And I feel like I've, at least for a long time been in this kind of recessed, like very manageable tics. But it's still like really be a pain in the ass, like, excuse my language, like really still cause, pain and issues and things that I'm like, it would be a lot easier if I didn't have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And, but I, who's to say that if my brain wasn't this way, like maybe there'd be other things that would be different too, that would be, that, I'd miss out on some of my like creativity or whatever.
Yeah.
But, there's no way to know if I could just take away, the tics where I'm like end up hurting myself because like, like skin's raw from like touching like a certain area for so long. Or, like I have like calcification in my shoulder areas from like over like hypermobilization, basically like issues of like neck and shoulder pain and stuff that I'm like,
yeah, me too. It's
sure.
The neck pain and the lack of sleep and like all kinds of other things where it's like, if I didn't have it, would it be a life improvement or would it, throw out the baby with the bathwater? There's really no way to know. And it's such an interesting thing to think about because like, as like, there's sort of like the identity / pride thing of like, no, I wouldn't get rid of it. Like, this is me and I'm going to, live my life the way I want. And then, it's like, there are a lot of things about this I really don't like. Yeah. And some of my worst moments ever, I'm like, I can directly trace it to whatever I'm diagnosed with. So it's like, I feel like it does represent my best and worst moments having something like this. Yeah. But because it represents my best too, I guess I should keep it, and we're just talking hypothetically, obviously.
It's awesome. Like, power to the people that are like, without hesitation, like, no, I'd keep it. Like, I wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah.
Like, that's awesome. There's.
Oh yeah, it's amazing.
And it's like, by no means am I ashamed of it. Like wanting to, say like, oh, I'd take a pill to get rid of it in a moment, just because that like, it's not that at all. It's purely like, it'd be great to sometimes not have these, these like hindrances or these things that, I don't know, make life a little bit more difficult. Like, but you could say that about, like, there's so many other issues in the world and different things that people struggle with that aren't even maybe themselves. Maybe it's like the fact that they're, born into a family that is really struggling, like financially, and you're like, why am I dealing? Why do I have to be like poor, or like why do I have to live in this area and like not be able to whatever it might be.
To me?
Like, why does that have to happen to me, right? And so at the end of the day, I'm still I think incredibly lucky with just what I've been given in my life and where I am. And so, if I have to take a hit with like my, like, there's gotta be something. I can't have a perfect life, right? Like there's gotta be a few things that fall out of, like, nobody's perfect. And even the people that look like they have a perfect life, like they probably have something that they're dealing with too, or there's something out there.
Yeah.
Some people definitely have it a lot better than others, but I like to at least, remind myself when I'm feeling like, woe is me, that it's like, well, I've got a lot of, things that I'm very lucky to have. And if having like Tourette's and dealing with, tics and anxiety and all the other things together, if that's going to be like, that's going to be one of my hurdles, like I can take it.
I mean, yeah, there have been times where I'm like, oh, woe is me, but I'm not viewing myself as, and not that it's a competition. I don't view myself as like having the worst circumstances in the world. And, there are some problems with thinking that way because I don't want to use somebody else's, difficult situation as something to make me feel better about myself. But it is true. I could have anything, or I could have nothing and not be able to experience the things that, the thought processes that I have right now, looking through a lens of flaw or whatever it is. And
because of this, like, you've made a huge difference in like the Tourette's community. I mean, like, if you just think about it even that way, it's like, as much as sometimes it really sucks and, all the other things that come along with it or whatever it is, like, you've created a positive influence on so many people and like made a difference. And even if it's only made a difference in, like 10 people's lives, that's still 10 people's lives that are, have improved because of it. But like, it's reached so many more people than that. So thank you for, for this and for everything that you've done for the Tourette's community. And I know it's, benefited yourself as well, but like all the other people, I mean, who could have thought that it would be more than just like conversations with a few people. It always had the potential, but like you brought it there,
Well, just think, if I messaged you and you were like, no, I don't know who you are, like, beat a creep, I'm not going to tell you about my personal life. And
well,
like,
I think I messaged, I think you sent out a tweet that was like, hey, I'm going to do this like podcast thing. I want to have conversations with people, like message me if you're interested. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because I mean, yeah, if I got like off the bat, like 3 or 4, like, no, thank you. I don't trust you. I don't know who you are.
Yeah.
That would have been it. The podcast would not have started. So I'm glad that you showed initiative, or we were able to talk and be like, okay, cool. Like this sounds legit. Let's do it. Because again, it set the tone for everything that followed, and it followed because that existed. So no, I have to thank you immensely.
And shout out to, I think it was Tourette Association of America that retweeted it, and that's how I saw it.
Yeah.
Like I think I followed them or something. So like I was searching like all hashtags for Tourette syndrome.
Right.
Like I wasn't actively searching out about like
yeah. Maybe a podcast exists today that I can message. Oh, finally, there it is.
Yeah. I search every day.
Thanks so much for listening. Thanks obviously to Maddie. Pleasure talking with her. She mentioned being in a really healthy relationship where Tourette syndrome was one of the big points in terms of, them getting to know one another. If you want, there's a past webinar. If you go to tourette.org and click the webinars button, You'll see what they've got coming up, but you'll also see past webinars. So Tourette.org, click the webinars button, and you'll see a webinar called Navigating Romantic Relationships, where there's a chronic condition in the mix. Like, how does all this work out? What's smart to do? This is with Dr. Katie Compoliti, and someone I've met actually in California named Eric McGowan. He's with the TAA Southern California chapter. Good webinar, and there's a lot more to check out as well. Those webinars are free, thanks to the support that people give the Tourette Association. I'm going to wrap it up for this week, and we will talk to you next time. If you've got any feedback, use the contact portal at tourettespodcast.com, and please feel encouraged to join the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook. Talk to you next week. This is Ben.